Another term is Autographa, or the autographs of Scripture that you will encounter in your reading for this course. And I may use the term a little bit later. But the autographer or autographs is a term that scholars use to speak of the original text. You might think that helps, but it doesn't really help. We still have to define it. And the illustration I have here is Shakespeare's works. So let me give you an example. Shakespeare writes Othello, okay, one of his plays. Did he write it in one sitting? No, probably took him weeks or months or maybe years to write. So he didn't write it in one sitting. There was more than one draft. So along the way, he's going to change things. So which is the autograph? The first draft, maybe the first draft incomplete, maybe even the first draft complete, or what he actually said was the finished product after 10, 15, 20, 100 drafts. Which one is the original? And when Othello gets published, it gets republished by different publishers, different works. It gets made into plays. So if I go to see the play Othello, and I'm listening to the dialogue, is the dialogue the autographa? Is the script for the play the original, or is the composition the original? How do you know? Well, the short answer is it's very difficult to know because we don't necessarily know how many drafts it took for Paul to write a letter. We don't know the conversation that Paul had with his amanuensis, which was a scribe, over how to word something precisely to a specific church or congregation. Again, we have in our minds this notion that Paul says, I need to write a letter to Corinth. And then his mind goes blank. God takes over his mind. And then, an hour later, Paul looks down, there's a scroll there sitting on his desk. And he's like, I can't wait to read that. And it doesn't make any sense. But we have no idea what the actual processes were. We just know that they did reach an end. And in my view, that thing at the end, when all of the original author's work is done, that becomes the autographa, at least to some extent. Now, I say to some extent, I'm even qualifying that because we know that from the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, and I'll give you a couple of examples of this as we go on, we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls that there were certain books still in process at the time the scrolls were produced, which is somewhere between the end of the biblical period, let's just call it 500 BC, and the 1st century AD. So somewhere in the middle of that, there are, for instance, 2 versions of an incident in the book of Joshua. There are 2 versions of the book of Jeremiah that we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, which one is the autograph? Again, how would we know? So we have to make some qualifications on how we understand the process of composition.